What is the Bitcoin memory pool, or mempool for short? Well, someone mentioned recently that they could use a primer on it, and so I was out here walking the dog and enjoying the sunset, and I thought, you know what, I'll do a quick primer on what is the Bitcoin mempool. So the memory pool, which is shortened to mempool, MEMPOOL, short for memory pool, is the place where Bitcoin transactions are stored before they are mined onto the Bitcoin blockchain. The mempool, often people will say the mempool, but it's kind of misleading because there is not one mempool. Every single Bitcoin node, of which there are tens of thousands of them spread across the world, including running on satellites, there are nodes all over, including in space. Every one of them has a mempool. And it is the place, the memory pool, where it tracks all of the Bitcoin transactions that it is aware of before a Bitcoin miner mines a group of those transactions into a block and then adds it to the Bitcoin blockchain. So all of the Bitcoin nodes have their own mempool. And so when people refer to the mempool, it's really they're referring to sort of the general consensus of what the memory pool is at any given time, even though that will change somewhat from Bitcoin node to Bitcoin node. So how does stuff get in the mempool? Well, it gets there because all Bitcoin nodes have what's called a gossip protocol. And the gossip protocol does exactly what you would expect a gossip protocol to do, which is it gossips to all of the other Bitcoin nodes about any transactions that it hears about. I think by default, it automatically forwards transactions to maybe 8 other nodes, although I'm not sure the exact number. It may forward it to all the reachable nodes that it knows about. But regardless, so every time you initiate a Bitcoin transaction, the Bitcoin software technology app that you're using, whether that's Coinbase or BitKey or whatever, it broadcasts to a set of Bitcoin nodes that it is aware of. Now, depending on where you are in the world, it could be any of those tens of thousands of Bitcoin nodes that have all become aware of each other through this gossip protocol, that they all say, hey, did you hear about this new node? Yes, And then if somebody is running a node that is trying to do stuff that is not helpful, like broadcasting invalid transactions, if they do it enough times, all the Bitcoin nodes will agree to blacklist that node, and then they will no longer accept transactions from that node if, for example, they find out that regularly that node is broadcasting old transactions, or it's broadcasting invalid transactions. So the Bitcoin nodes are all pre-programmed by the Bitcoin Core software to only accept valid transactions and to blacklist any nodes that start regularly, broadcasting invalid transactions, which obviously are never going to make it into the Bitcoin protocol, because invalid transactions by definition would never actually make it into a block, but they do create, network traffic as nodes chat with each other, or better, said, gossip with each other. So if a node is, sharing gossip that's not real, it'll get blacklisted and the other nodes won't even connect to it or listen to it anymore, or accept connections from it. So anyway, so when you initiate a Bitcoin transaction, it reaches out to a Bitcoin node that is well connected, or a variety of nodes, and it says, hey, I want to process this transaction. Here is my private key that proves that it is my transaction to broadcast and that it's legitimate. The nodes that receive that broadcast will check to make sure the transaction is valid, that the Bitcoin in question has not already been spent somewhere else, and that you are the legitimate owner of the private keys, which they do not know what your private keys are, but they check to make sure that mathematically you've proven that you have them, even though you do not expose those in the Bitcoin transaction. And then it will process the transaction, and what it will do is it will then rebroadcast that Bitcoin transaction from its own mempool, which got that transaction in it when you initiated the transaction. It will then rebroadcast that transaction to all of the other mempools that it is aware of. So as a result of that, you end up with that Bitcoin transaction being present in a matter of a few fractions of a second, up to a few seconds. All of the Bitcoin nodes in the entire world will become aware of that transaction. And again, there's Bitcoin nodes running on satellites from Blockstream and others. And so there's so many nodes anywhere in the world that even if the internet has a massive disruption, it's virtually guaranteed that all of the transactions within a matter of a couple seconds are broadcast, rebroadcast all over the world until all of the Bitcoin nodes are aware of your transaction. Typically, that is why, if you send Bitcoin to somebody and you're literally sitting across the desk from them, it will be a couple seconds until their Bitcoin app registers that they have received Bitcoin. Because during that time, the Bitcoin transaction is being broadcast and rebroadcast all over in order to update the mempools all over the world. So the mempool, again, there's not one mempool. People say the mempool, but they're referring to sort of the general consensus of all of the mempools. But there is no one the mempool, because if somebody said check the mempool, there's not one mempool. There's just a mempool that is on every node. Now, the most popular node that people use to check the mempool is mempool.space. That's mempool.space, S-P-A-C-E. And the reason for that is mempool has done a good job of creating a graphical user interface, GUI, called a GUI, a pretty interface for this. And I should have said this at the beginning of the video, but this is an advanced video for people who are super technical and into this sort of stuff. So if that's not you, you can skip this video and it will not harm your Bitcoin journey whatsoever. This is just a curiosity for people who are interested in what the mempool is and more the technical side of Bitcoin. So anyway, so there's all these mempools. You broadcast a transaction. Within a second or two, all of the nodes everywhere in the world have broadcast and rebroadcast, everyone asking all the other nodes, hey, are you aware of this transaction? And if they say no, they add it to their own mempool and then rebroadcast to all of their nodes. And again, within a couple seconds, all of the nodes have either added it to their mempool or confirmed they already have it, and therefore the nodes stop rebroadcasting it once it's clear that all the nodes have it. So the mempool then has these group of transactions. Now, if there's not very much traffic in the mempool, the next Bitcoin block will clear the entire mempool, meaning all of the transactions that are waiting to be processed will be clear all at one time. Now, that used to happen a lot in the early days of Bitcoin. The mempool was almost always, not full. And therefore, every 10 minutes or so, when a new Bitcoin block was mined, it would clear the mempool entirely. But after about 2017, it became rarer and rarer for the mempool to be busy. And that was by design. The mempool, the total amount of Bitcoin transactions that can be in a block, have a hard cap of 1 megabyte. And that is, Satoshi Nakamoto added that cap, which ended up being very controversial during the block size wars, which if you're curious about that, you can read the book, The Block Size Wars by Jonathan Baer. I think it's B-E-I-R or B-I-E-R or something like that. First name's Jonathan. Anyway, The Block Size Wars. But anyway, the block size limit ended up being very controversial during that time period. But it was put there by Satoshi to keep people from spamming the Bitcoin blockchain. So, for example, filling the Bitcoin blockchain with a bunch of, let's say, tiny 1 Satoshi transactions, with the goal being to try to do a denial of service attack, meaning you just flood the network with a bunch of junk transactions. It'd be like somebody showing up to a convenience store and saying, hey, I want to buy 1 stick of gum at a time, and I want to buy all your sticks of gum, and I'm here to pay for it with pennies. And I'm going to count the pennies out one by one. Then obviously that would take a really long time, and everybody behind you in the line would get super annoyed because you've basically completely jammed up the checkout line, purchasing sticks of gum one by one with pennies. So anyway, in order to avoid that, the Bitcoin blockchain, Satoshi Nakamoto put in a block size limit of 1 megabyte. And then the intent was for then the transactions to have to bid to be included in the next block, with the thought process being that long term, that depending on how urgent it was that your transaction get in the block, that you would, bid whatever 25 cents or 50 cents or whatever it cost to get a Bitcoin transaction, and that any transactions that needed to be cheaper would be done on the Bitcoin Lightning Network, which is the layer 2 payment network for Bitcoin. It's called the Lightning Network, and I've talked about that before. So as a result of that, what's called a fee marketplace developed. And a fee marketplace is basically, here's all the people waiting in line, and depending on what fee you pay, determines whether you'll get in the next block or the block after it, or you might have to wait 5 minutes or 10 minutes, you might have to wait an hour, or if you bid some super low, you might have to wait till, a few hours until the middle of the night when there's not much activity on the Bitcoin blockchain. So that was by design, because eventually the number of new coins that are issued by the Bitcoin protocol, it drops in half every 4 years. Right now, every 10 minutes, the Bitcoin miners get 3.125 Bitcoin. So whoever mines the next Bitcoin block gets 3.125 Bitcoins. But eventually that drops in half every 4 years in 2028, 2032, 2036, 2040, all the way to the year 2140, which is 117 years away. 116 now. So 116 years away. So in 116 years, in the year 2040, then there will be no more block rewards, and the network will entirely run on transaction fees. So it was important that there be a transaction fee marketplace, because the transaction fees is how the miners get paid exclusively starting in 2140, and then they get weaned off the block size, the block rewards between now and 2140. So that process has been, going smoothly. The percentage of each block that is the rewards are made up of block rewards as compared to transaction fees has been steadily and slowly and steadily transitioning toward transaction fees, which is what was intended to happen, and that's all on track. So as a result of that, you have to bid to get in the next block. So the question is, what happens if you end up with a bunch of random transactions with a very low bid? And the answer to that is, looks like it's dusk, so I've got to go find another park here. So if the transactions are super low bid, you end up with a backlog of transactions where the Bitcoin miners, the transactions have bid too low to be included in the next block. And that is the case on the Bitcoin mempool right now. There's about 100 blocks of random transactions, mostly dust transactions, basically super small transactions of people goofing off, playing around, processing transactions that if you string them all together, it spells their own name, etching, various graphical images into the Bitcoin blockchain. And all of those make up about 100 blocks. So earlier today it was about 80 blocks, 80. So those 80 blocks will eventually clear, or they might never clear, because they might never be valuable enough for a miner to include them in a block. But they don't matter, because as of earlier today, as long as you are willing to pay 18 cents, that's 0.18, so less than 1/5 of $1 US, you could transfer absolutely any amount of Bitcoin you wanted to transfer. You could do that for 18 cents earlier today, which means all of the transactions that are in a backlog are only there because people have bid 1 cent or 2 cents or 5 cents or, some ridiculously small amount of money. And they either did that because they're goofing off with the transactions, or because, they're trying to etch a JPEG image or a message to a loved one or something in the Bitcoin blockchain, and they didn't want to pay real money to do that because etching those images costs a lot more transactions. So anyway, there's about an 80 block backlog on the mempool, but it doesn't matter, because as long as you pay any reasonable fee, your transaction will be processed at the front of the pack. And earlier today, that was 18 cents. So that is a quick primer on the mempool. And if I think of more about it, I will add to this video. But that is the